Hi, Mitra Manesh. This is Kevin and David from Meditation Magazine, interviewing Mitra Manesh, a teacher of mindfulness and meditation from California, with work at UCLA over the past 8 years, and also training individuals and trying to make an impact in the world through meditation. So welcome to our podcast / video interview YouTube thing.
Thank you. Thank you. Hi, everyone.
Thank you for being here. So we like to usually start out these interviews with a short meditation.
Mm-hmm.
So do you have a particular type of meditation that you like to practice?
Actually, I have a variety of meditations because I learned it in many, many different schools and countries. But the best one is to actually do it with our eyes open, the one that I like, and becoming aware of all the feelings that are in us right now, and we're aware of it, and allowing all of them to be there and not fighting with anyone and not even getting attached to anyone. As Rumi says, let's welcome all guests, both uninvited and invited guests.
Mm. So to sit with the eyes open, there was a little bit of static in the call, so it was a little hard to hear, but you said to be aware of all the emotions and all of the feelings, and to be sitting with it without resisting and just experiencing this, welcoming all experiences, essentially?
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah, well put.
Okay, cool. You want to take a moment to do that? Maybe 3 breaths worth of time?
Yes, let's do 3 breaths together. Deep, conscious, kind breaths. Thank you. I see you, Kevin. I do.
I see
More
you.
than just seeing you, I
Yeah,
really see you now.
yeah. I see you too. Thank you. That was nice. So how did you get started on your journey into meditation?
Mm. So I'm going to make the very long story short. I was born in Iran
Oh,
and literally walked out of Iran in October of 1980. So I lived in Europe, I lived in Australia, and the time that I started meditating was in the early 80s when I was in my early 20s, where I think anything external I had lost. I had lost my father, I had lost my country, I had lost my possessions, belongings, contacts, and I was sitting alone, I remember, in Perth, Western Australia, thinking, seems like outer world is not working very well. And I had a friend who was into meditation, and she suggested that I went to a center called TM Center. Those days, I think meditation came to the Western world through TM. And I learned how to do Transcendental Meditation. And it was very fascinating what happened for me, what meditation did for me. There was another world within the world that I was somehow familiar with but didn't have a language for. So I started in the 80s. The short answer is that I started basically because of desperation. And I always say it was meditation or medication, and I went for meditation.
nice. Yeah, that's true. It's a good thing that those words rhyme. It makes for a lot of good expressions.
Correct.
Yeah, I think I'd written an article called "Meditate, Don't Medicate" or something like that.
Yes, it's too easy not to use it. It was just
Yeah.
but I remember literally that was the case. It wasn't like it was a cute thing that came to me because my best friend was also my physician, and she suggested that I take some medication, and I told her that, I think I'm gonna go for meditation and let the medication be medication. So
Wow. Yeah. I'm always fascinated by people's stories. Um, when you left Iran, was that like I 1980 was before I was born, so I don't really remember the history so well. Was that around the time that the Shah was like taken out, taken like he lost his power?
Yes, Shah had left, and Khomeini, who was a clergy, had come over to Iran. He was in exile by Shah,
Mm.
and he returned to Iran and took over power, and things were upside down, the best way to explain it. And I did not tune in with the best way to put it is with the political forces of those days. And the war between Iran and Iraq also started. When Khomeini came, he
Mm.
started a war with Iraq, and about a year later. So the airports were closed. So I literally walked out of Iran and walked into the border of Iran and Turkey, and life was challenging. I think I realized that just think about everything you're counting on right now, like your community, your contacts, your family, your friends, your loved ones. Imagine losing everything literally overnight. And I left with a bag smaller than the bag that I now take to work. And that's all I had. There was nothing there. I had only about, I think, under $1,000 and few photos, and that's it. That's all I had.
Wow. You had to leave your family there too?
Yes, yes. Left everybody of all the contacts, and was a fascinating times because um, it's interesting. I had escaped from a system that everywhere I went, I was representing them. So
Mm.
people saw, I mean, I suppose everybody, but I can only speak about my own experience. Everybody saw me as representative of what was happening in Iran, yet it was the very thing that I had escaped from. So it's like I had to justify what was happening in Iran. And of course, I was younger and I was very political, but it was fascinating. I lived in Paris first, the first place that I could go to because I had visa to go to France, and so I stayed in Paris for a month, for a year, a year, and then moved to Australia. But I think the whole journey was important in a sense that I earlier on in my life, I went in. I realized the best refuge for me was inside because outside was not manageable by me. It was just completely out of control. And I think the journey within started then. And I realized that there is another home. It's not just outer home because I had lost everything outer. And I realized there's an inner place that is safer and it's always there and it never changes unless I want it to. And that really gave me a very beautiful, grounded sense of agency that, you know, this is something that I can count on and it's in my hands.
Wow. Yeah, so I like to sort of flesh out the story. So when you were traveling through, you went Turkey and then Paris and then Australia.
Mhm.
So when you were going through that journey, you said that it felt, like the outer world was messed up. It wasn't good. Whatever words you used for it. What did it feel like to be in that kind of chaotic crumbling outer world? What was going on inside?
Hmm. Inside was searching. I think my curiosity and searching for something else really expedited and also became deeper. Because when there's nothing you can rely on, and it was literally that for me, there was nothing I could rely on. I didn't have a visa to be anywhere. I didn't have anybody I could count on. I didn't have any sources, outer sources. I was in a way lucky, and I know it's hard for people to understand that at the times. That is like very, very painful. That when everything crumbles, everything outside of you crumbles, you either go in or you go really out crazy. And I think I just decided that I want to go in, and there were a lot of course. I call them prerequisites in my life that had already taken me there. I had teachers, I had Rumi, I grew up with philosophy. But I mean, it's not like I sat there and I thought about Rumi when I was, like really sobbing about losing everything. But they, I'm sure, had something to do with the way I turned into the inner world and found that groundedness and anchor, if you like. And what happened was when meditation worked for like 10 minutes, 20 minutes a day, I became extremely curious about living as if I was meditating. We didn't have this vocabulary. You have to understand those days when I started these things, mindfulness was not fancy and sexy and fashionable. So people didn't talk about these things. I used to say, oh, I'm going to go to your room to rest. We didn't say these things. We hadn't come out of the closet yet.
Mm.
So I know what I'm saying is very known these days, but when I was doing it, where it was extremely unusual and unknown. What is called mindfulness, and I teach it now at the School of, Semel Institute School of Neuroscience, was then just a thing that I discovered. I realized, it works really well for a short period of time. What if I could talk? What if I could drive? What if I could work? I could mother. Later on, I had 2 kids. What if I could even fight and argue
Mm.
while connecting with something really deep and grounded in me? What if I could cook? What
Mm.
if I could dance? I mean, I'm going to go to Okeechobee, music festival in March, and we're going to be talking about and practicing what I call mindful movement, dance within. So everything I was doing, I was curious about if I could do it like I do it when I'm meditating. And that became an amazing journey. That became a very rich life.
Wow. Yeah, that's very powerful, that you were realizing that at the beginning of your meditative journey, that it didn't have to just be sitting down meditating. It's meditate, like you can bring the power of meditation into your everyday life. So what I want to know is, you were in Perth, right, in Australia, and you had just gone to the TM Center, and learned Transcendental Meditation, which is mostly a mantra-based meditation, right? It's you're repeating a mantra. So, was it during that time that you were trying to bring meditation into your life? Were you trying to use the mantra in your everyday life, or were you just trying to be in sort of a meditative state in your everyday life?
Hmm. So beginning was just discovery. Beginning was, oh, I can let these wild waters, I can let this really out of control horse settle down. And once I realized that I can, then it became very personal. And I am indebted to many, many schools of learning, but I belong to none of them. So I moved on, and it was fantastic and it was great. And it's a tool that I still use because I do a lot of corporate training. I do a lot of work with individuals one on one. So I use it because, as you know, there are like different kinds of meditation, and that's focused meditation. It's fantastic for settling down, but I always say it's a great place to visit, not a good place to become citizen. So I'll visit it. I use it as a tool, but I moved forward and through other teachers, through many schools of isms, I learned other ways of meditating. As you know, there is the visualization, there is the focus meditation, there is the cultivation, there is the mindfulness. There is so many, and every one of them have served me, but none of them have stayed my only master.
Great. So you have like a tool belt now where you have all these different tools, different types of meditation for different types of situations.
Correct,
Yeah.
correct. And use it both for myself and for, when I'm teaching, coaching, and training, depending on if I'm in a workplace, like focused meditation is extremely helpful because everybody wants to settle down. But if I'm in a place that the person is traumatized and needs something more, definitely other tools are far more conducive to their healing.
Hmm. Wow. Like, so what would you use for someone who is traumatized? Something like a metta meditation, like a compassion type thing?
Yes, connecting to that's the cultivation basically. You want to really bring a different state because the state that they're in is not, obviously helpful for them. And it's not as general as this. It really depends on, I don't have one prescription, but it mainly is cultivating or visualizing and taking them out of there so that they can at that moment realize that there is an alternative and there's a safer place to go to, at least for the time being, until they have a sort of a sense of themselves. So
So
like you described TM. I think that was a great insight like on TM, because I have like a little bit of a personal issue with TM in that sometimes it's gotten better in recent years, but especially at the origin, it was seen as very like not kind of like not culty, but like you had to kind of pay to play, and it seemed like very like exclusive almost. So I like the idea of like dipping your toe in different schools of practice, and I wanted to if this is applicable to you at all or not, if religion and any kind of like faith in your upbringing, if you also incorporated any of that into like your toolbox of meditation, or if that had any influence at all on the eventual kind of discovery of meditation, whether in a good way or like a way that like brought resistance. Because I know that for me, like meditation was kind of like a way for me to reconcile like my Judaism growing up, my kind of relationship with God and faith. So I want to know if you had any of that on your end.
Great question. So because of my experience, I had become a little bit allergic to religion, and I'm sure you can appreciate that. And what I decided, and I don't think it was just this clear then, but now that I look back, what I decided was that there is wisdom. And as my teacher, my Buddhist teacher used to say, there is a gift in everything that I come across. So I decided that I will go into any ism without any judgment, get the wisdom, and just leave the rest. I always say, get the gift and leave the rest, and come out. I actually then started doing everything I was doing in a very secular way. And to this day, I never ever use any words that might activate anyone. It's extremely secular because I used to get activated by any ism. And then I also realized that every ism, there is the wisdom aspect of it, but then there is the political aspect of it, and the PR aspect of it. I never connected to that part, to be honest with you, but there is wisdom in everything. I mean, it's really amazing how much wisdom there is in every ism. The problem is what I saw, at least then, in many isms, was that the people were more preoccupied by the politics of it, and as I think Kevin called it, the cultish aspect of it, and that was always something that really did not attract me. As late as a few years ago here in LA, I joined a group, was basically around Rumi's philosophy, and it was fantastic and learned a lot. We had a wonderful teacher, but then I realized that the teacher has become more interesting and more important to the students than the teachings. And anytime that happens, it's time for me to leave, because I'm very interested in the teachings, but very little interested in the teachers. And by the way, I do the same thing when I have like followings, if you like. I don't know what that means, but people who always are, interested in what I have to say. And I always say, please focus on the teachings, because I'm just a tool. Just like you and I are using Skype right now to connect with each other, I'm just that tool. If I have anything of value, my job is to just offer it to you. So I don't worship the Skype. I don't worship my laptop, but I listen to what you have to say, and I really, appreciate this exchange. So yeah, that was the part that was not attractive to me in any ism, when the ism and the teachers were far more valued than the teachings itself. Yeah.
Gotcha. Yeah, that's a very insightful answer. You've mentioned their name a few times, and I have some familiarity with them, but just for people that aren't, aware, could you kind of describe who Rumi is?
Oh, sure.
Yeah.
Yes. Rumi, sorry, the assumption is that, yeah, thank you for that clarification. Rumi is a poet, philosopher, who lived over 800 years ago. And he actually was from a very religious family. In fact, his father was the head of the mosque. He was a Muslim, and was grooming Rumi to become the head of the mosque. And Rumi met his teacher called Shams. I mean, there's a lot of stories about it. We're not sure if Shams actually was a person or was a teacher, just a vibration. Honestly, it doesn't matter. But when he met Shams, his teacher, Shams, by the way, means the sun. When he met Shams, the light, the sun, fascinating, his life changed. And there's a beautiful story that Rumi stops going to the mosque, and people are very upset because in Islam, a lot of questions are answered by head of the, whoever is leading the prayer and is in charge of the mosque. So people are upset and they're angry with Shams, the new teacher, and ask him to return so that they can ask questions. And Rumi sits there in his chair and people ask many questions. And he gets up and starts dancing and says to them, and the dance is a famous Sama dance, which is one hand to the sky and one hand to the ground, which is very symbolic, bringing the sky and the earth together. And he says, I have found my dance. You should all go and find your own. I cannot help you or answer your questions any longer. So that's the Rumi that I'm talking about.
And because I've heard of Rumi from my Muslim practicing friends, that's how I'm familiar with him. But do you kind of adhere or get inspiration from Rumi in a context of practicing Islam, or do you kind of separate the two, the faith from the poet?
I only practice consciousness. That's the only thing I practice. I do not belong to any religion, but I respect all of them. But no, I'm not a practicing Muslim, if that's the question. I'm not. And the only reason I'm attracted to Rumi is because of his journey and the fact that he questioned everything about his religion and went with the spirituality and let go of the religion. So he could be believing in anything and I'll still be interested in him.
That's awesome. All right. Thank you.
Thank you.
Great. So I had a couple other questions about what you're up to right now. I think it's pretty cool that you're working in the neuroscience department at UCLA because I think it's important for science to sort of catch up with the ancient wisdom of meditation. Can you talk a little bit about what you're doing there at UCLA?
Sure. I have to put a disclaimer there that I'm not a scientist and I teach at Mindful Awareness Research Center, which is in the School of Neuroscience. However, the reason they allow me to teach in a place like that is because now the science has caught up with the wisdom. Wisdom knew thousands of years, but science needed documentation and verification, and thank God we have it now. And that's why now science has become the verification and evidence for the wisdom that the sages and the teachers knew for thousands of years. So it's interesting. I have a couple of scientist clients and students. I say something and they give me the evidence of it. And that's why I was hesitant to go there when you asked me that question, because I want to make sure that I'm not claiming that I'm a scientist. I know things that now by science has been verified, but I am not a scientist. But it's fascinating things happening. Now you can Google anything in mindfulness, anything, and mindfulness and see how many things show up. When I was first started teaching, I was, I think it was about 25 years ago when I was talking and teaching mindfulness. I remember I had printed, there were only 3 pieces of evidence that I had, and I had printed it and I was taking them with me everywhere I went because everybody was sort of so suspicious and like, well, I'm not sure, what are you saying, and who said that? And I would say, here, study these. There were 3 of them. Now there are millions, and now I just give them a link and say, go and check it out for yourself. But yes, that's what I'm doing. I also have a private practice in Beverly Hills, California, where I see clients and teach them to love, live, and lead mindfully, because I also take mindfulness to workplaces. And I've been doing that for 35 years when these things weren't really welcomed. And I didn't call it that, to be honest with you. I called it inner and outer. I called it form and substance. My business was called Form and Substance for 2 decades. and all the big names. I mean, if you check my resume, there were a lot of big names that were interested, and they didn't know. They said, like, you do it a bit differently. And I said, yeah, thank you. But what I was really doing, I was bringing my practice into my workplace, and I was teaching and training and coaching through mindfulness, but didn't use that vocabulary. I just called it deeper sense of yourself. There was I have a whole wonderful vocabulary that I had developed without saying anything that might have brought a sense of aversion, because there were 2-3 groups that had a very sort of gentle reaction to anything that had to do with the inner world. People who were religious, that was first, because they thought that going in any other path would be against or a betrayal of what they believe in. People who were anti-religion, who thought, like, this sounds like a religion to me. So I was very careful with that. Or people who thought there is no room for inner work to show up at workplace. So I was working with 3 very strong groups with aversion. So I really crafted a language that was very, very neutral and allowed me to say and do and teach them what I was interested in doing without really provoking their sensitivities.
That's fascinating to me. I actually have seen that's been a trend in like mindfulness and meditation over the past few decades. You see, for example, magazines like Mindful that are really trying to, they don't use the word meditation, they use the word mindfulness, and they really try to avoid any kind of religious symbolism. And so for us, so for our magazine, you'll notice like we have like some like Om symbols and things like that, and we use the word meditation. I feel like maybe our direction is almost a little bit of a reaction against going too far in the other direction, if you know what I mean. What I worry about is, well, it's not, I'm not like always worried about it, but you know what I mean. I kind of see like this whole trend going in a direction where it becomes very clinical.
Mm-hmm.
And I worry that it loses a lot of the spiritual depth when you sort of have to be like avoiding any religious words, but also maybe avoiding spiritual words. And I feel like there's an important distinction there. But I'm not sure. I feel like maybe there needs to be a balance. Maybe there needs to be some teachers that are going very clinical for those like hardcore atheist, hardcore like anti-religion people. They don't want to hear anything about spirituality. They just want to know how to improve their brains and optimize their cognitive processes and things. Do you think that it loses something when you avoid the spiritual aspect? Do you feel like there's something deeper that's hard to get to when you just talk in scientific and clinical terms?
Mm-hmm. I do agree with you, by the way, completely, that there is a balance. And when I don't know my generation, at least when I did it, I can only speak from my experience. When I did it, it was just a pure necessity. If I used any other language, it was, and also, no, I should also say that I was also sensitive about anything. As I mentioned, I had a bit of gentle allergy because of my personal experience about religion. But I do completely agree with you that when it becomes too, I call it mechanical. When it's mechanical, it loses its essence. But you have to understand, it is not what we say, it is not the vocabulary, it is really the vibration and the practice that we're seeking. That's far more important to me. You can call me anything, you can tell me anything. If I feel right with you, I really, it doesn't matter. And it was interesting, I was speaking at a conference and I was sitting next to a very intelligent young woman who had done her PhD in the same area. So we were both speaking, and of course my experience was basically from my personal experience and professional experience, and hers was extremely academic and very valuable. So we have lunch, and she's attracted to me, and I'm attracted to her because we've got like really good work together. And she comes to me and she says, yeah, so there's something about you that I feel I'm missing. What is it? I said, I don't know, I can't answer that, but let me ask you a question. Do you practice? She said, practice what? I said, how can I put it gently? Practice all your research. And she said, she went all red. She was blushing. She said, no, to be honest with you, I don't. I said, I think that's the difference. Everything I teach, in fact, by the way, if I haven't practiced it, if I haven't experienced it, I do not teach that. I have said no to subjects that they wanted me to teach only because I could not sit there and I say, this is what happens for me. I didn't mention, but I have an app out. It's called Inner Map, which is purely built on stories. And the reason for that is that my classes at UCLA are very, very popular. They usually, go into waiting list. Which is, unusual. I mean, people, it's not a concert that, you really want to do it. So I asked students who really come to me and I said, what is it about what I teach? And by the way, I think I'm the least qualified academically of teachers. And they all told me, is your stories. It's your stories that are attractive. We can relate to them. So those stories were real stories. Of course, I modify them, take names out, put a little bit of more, personal touch to it, but they are true stories. So you can only build stories, you can only tell stories, you can only teach through stories when you have been part of those story making. So hence the app that is like teaching you with 3-4 minute stories. By the way, that's how I learned. I learned from my teachers through stories. Yeah, it gets too technical when we just learn it from books and we think it's a great idea. And you know what? You cannot fool people. I can listen to anyone for 2 minutes and can tell you if this was a research project or a wonderful book that they wrote or read, or is it something that they have truly experienced. The difference is between doing and being. I can do mindfulness, but I need to be mindful in order to be able to hold the space. Another story from a teacher, very short one. My teacher told me, and this was a Buddhist teacher, by the way, a Buddhist monk, a Vivekananda. He told me you should be able to teach mindfulness if you lose your tongue. And I said, Vivekananda, how can I teach without my tongue? He said, he took his hands out and he said, by holding it and being it, by showing it, not by saying it.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's deep.
I'm pretty moved right now.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's a powerful thing.
Yeah.
And actually, it touches on something that we had been talking about earlier, where you said, I'm interested in the teachings, not the teachers.
Mhm.
But I feel like that, considering what you were just saying, I think it needs to be qualified a little bit, because sometimes it is the teacher without the person saying anything. They can be showing you something without giving you any verbal teaching. It's just radiating off of them. You know what I mean?
True.
Yeah,
I agree with you. But then it is the teachings that have been fully realized by a being.
yeah,
So again, it's the teachings that needs to be fully realized, because especially these days, if you look at the teaching, everybody has the right vocabulary. I'm not worried about vocabulary. Everybody talks about unity and elevation of soul and oneness and mindfulness and neuroscience, and that's fantastic. But that's only at the mind level. That's fantastic at best. So to me, learning has 3 stages. There is the identification, when we realize, like I told you, there is something deeper. Then it's at the mind level, which is comprehension, which is fantastic. You get it, you get it. You say, oh, I got it, Mitra. But but then it's the realization, the last and most amazing step of it, which I actually incorporated in my everyday living. I now realize, like, my heart is beating a bit harder. I realize that I'm quite connected with what I'm saying with you. I can see you as a fellow human being who's on the journey. At that moment of realization, I could not pay attention to what name you give it. You could have any name for your journey, any name for yourself, for your teacher, for the place that you learned from or are affiliated with. I connect with you. I don't have any aversion to that. my only sensitivity, and it's not even aversion, it's a very mild sensitivity, is when people who comprehend it or identify it believe that they have realized it. Because only for them, because then they won't continue their journey. If I think I know, I'll stop knowing.
Yeah, that's a good point. So, where do you see yourself in 10 years from now? What are you trying to do, like, with your life for the next, 10, 20 years? What do you want to do?
So I am in my 60s. I am 62. And the only reason I'm doing what I'm doing is because I want to leave this world. And I'm very aware that I'm at the latter part of my life. And happily so, by the way. I also teach mindful aging. I want to leave this world a better place than I left it. And it sounds great, sounds like a Hallmark card, but I really mean that. I mean that in a sense that I'm very much involved in artificial intelligence and mindfulness. And I think, and I want to be far more involved. I spoke at a conference that is done by Jeff Bezos every year, Mars conference that is by invitation only. And I insisted that I talk about mindfulness and artificial intelligence because we have made up this future that frightens the hell out of us, thinking that artificial intelligence will take over, and it may, but think about, at least initially, whose consciousness is creating that artificial intelligence, whose non-artificial natural intelligence is giving birth to that in artificial intelligence. So I see my role to be extremely involved in that world, because that is my responsibility. I see everything expediting in their movement. And I love the fact that young people like you are part of it, but I have a huge responsibility. I sense it, to be involved in the creation of the consciousness aspect of it. So I see myself in 10 years, actually far before that, being very much part of the artificial intelligence and mindfulness, where we help artificial intelligence to help us get closer to our journeys and not take us away from the journey of elevation.
Wow, that's
I love that.
That's very powerful. Before we wrap up the interview, I just you just touched on a very fascinating subject to me, like how AI will change the world and how we can integrate consciousness and mindfulness into that. And for me, I've thought about it before in terms of how to create conscious AI, how to understand what consciousness is like from a subjective perspective, and how to actually create the first conscious machine. But I kind of like what you're saying, the direction that you're taking into it, which is seemingly whose consciousness is creating that AI, and how is that going to affect the way that the AI operates. And to me, it seems like every individual programmer who's programming the AI is going to have some impact on the way that the AI operates. So to me, it would seem that, based on what you're saying, that the consciousness of the humans that are programming, like the actual literal programmers that are sitting and coding, is actually going to influence what AI becomes.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And the way we use it, you have to understand, almost everything mechanical, technical doing that we do, and AI will do it faster. So the nature of our busyness, and that's busy with Y-ness, is going to change. So we need to, so yes to that, but I'm also adding to that, that even at the end user perspective, not just the producer of it, but also the end user of it, the meaning that now at least the Western world ascertains from work will change. I may no longer be able to get meaning from my work. So the question is, where do I find meaning in my life? So everything that we put in there becomes augmented. Whatever we have told that artificial intelligence, whatever code we have put in there, and how we use it is going to be extremely important. So the calling here, let me tell you what I want to say. The calling here is for everyone to put their act together and really wake up, because soon it will be out of our control. And I'm extremely passionate about that. This is no longer, oh, let's be nice people and have self-compassion and I love you and you love me. It is about, if we don't wake up, something will really drastically go wrong. And I don't believe in conspiracy theories, to be honest with you. I think we, every second, every breath, we have a say in what's going to go on. But right now, because of the speed of things, we need to wake up soon. We need to understand, and I always think the movies of nations is very much the indicator of their collective consciousness. So when I look at the movies, it's almost all of them are fear-based, based on AIs of the future. Almost all of them, not all of them, but almost all of them. And that tells me that we have this fear that they, whoever they are going to take over. But they are now, at least, I call them our mechanical children, are being raised by us. So if I knew, imagine you were my son and I'm raising you and you're very, 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 young, but I know for sure that you will be running the world. I would put a very different attention on raising you, because I would know the future depends on you. And that's the responsibility that those so-called programmers and coders have. It's not that they are out of our control. It's that they will be if we do not pay attention to it. That's why I am almost forcing mindfulness, consciousness, it doesn't matter what you call it. I want to call it awakeness into creation, grooming, and usage of artificial intelligence. That is why I will live as long as necessary to make sure that happens. I don't know how long it would be, and it doesn't matter. It could be 2 years. I'm happy to go if I've done what I've done and leave, because I'm waiting to discover the other side. But if it's 20 years, if it's 30 years, if it's 80 years, I'll be here to make sure that happens.
Wow. Yeah. And are you like practically focusing on trying to bring the programmers who are working on the artificial intelligence into the mindfulness practice? Because I mean, if I were you, that's probably what I would do. Like focus on those programmers, maybe focus on the people that are managing the programmers, so that it trickles down, like the Elon Musk types, the Bezos types, anybody who's like in AI. I feel like you should like focus on getting those people to like get the mindfulness, to understand, like to get into the practice, because I feel like that's maybe the best way to accomplish what you're saying.
Mm-hmm. I'm doing it right at this moment by giving this message. Yes, I am. And you know what is interesting? As soon as I decided to do that, it's amazing who contacts me. So it's vibrationally, by being and by doing. And I think it's also responsibility of young people to reach out and understand that this is where older experience, I don't want to call it anything else, because that may give a preference to anything. Older experience and a deeper experience is necessary. I don't know anything about coding. I actually got to know it a little bit through creating an app, working with young people. But I know that knowledge, when it's not turning into wisdom, is a dangerous tool.
Yeah, wow. This has been a very enlightening and fascinating interview. Thank you, Mitra, for joining us on this podcast / YouTube video. And I hope that we see in like going into the future, more mindfulness trickling into the coding community there in California, people who are working on AI, and we'll know that that's your handiwork. I appreciate it.
Thank you. I'm very grateful for both of you. Bye, David. Bye, Kevin.
Hi. Thank you so much for your time, for your stories.
Thank you.